Hi there. Welcome to the first of my quarantine notes. For the last, 20, 25 years, I've been giving keynotes all around the country, all around the world. I've been to 40 countries. I've presented to parliaments and Congress. I've presented to presidents, provosts, audiences of 15 to 15,000. I wanted to take this time, since we're all kind of stuck together, to present some of my stuff in a different way. I've really tried to use and leverage these presentations over the years in training formats, workshops, but also as plenaries, keynotes. And since basically almost all of my keynotes have been canceled for the year, most conferences have been scrubbed, and I already had 5 lined up for March, and that's probably not going to happen. I wanted to try to give back a little bit. So I've gone back and I've looked at some of the best bits that I've got from my time, and I'm going to try to present them to you. Now I'm going to do it in this format, at home, no suit, barely shaven. I don't know if you can see. I'll shave tomorrow, I think. I've got some meetings that I've got to pay attention to. And my hair definitely needs a cutting, to try to get me back up to the 5 out of 10 I normally sit at versus the 3 out of 10 I'm currently at. So I guess we'll see. Now, this first one is going to really just be a little bit of an introduction to me. I realize that some of you may have not heard of me before, may not have been to a conference where I've spoken, may not have seen me present. And so I want to quickly answer why you should care about any of this. This is probably the only slideshow that I'm going to recreate and add some things to. Everything else I'm just literally going to pull out of the keynotes that I've given. So why should you care what I have to say? Well, I've been a professor for 22 years. I started in communication. That's my home discipline. I got my doctorate in education, and I teach education classes as well. I also have become a bit known for the interpretation of neuroscience as it applies to education and learning, as well as change, vision, management, leadership, creativity, some of those sorts of things. During my time in my formal roles, outside of being a graduate assistant, I've also spent 12 years as a formal academic administrator. I've been a coordinator, a director. I was the chief innovation officer for St. Leo University for a time. I've also spent about 12 years serving as an executive in a position to support or serve academia. I ran a think tank for Pearson Learning for a while. I worked for the learning management system company, eCollege, as their chief academic officer for a time. So I've been doing this a long time, whether it's formally in higher ed or sort of in a para higher ed context. And I've also taught some high school classes back in the early parts of what I was doing. Along the way, I have tried to be sort of a vision caster as well as a trend observer, writing for a lot of different blogs, my own, as well as guest blogging. Every year I'm asked to talk about what's coming in the next 12 months and possibly the next 5 years, 10 years as it relates to education. So I thought I would just leave you kind of with something that I think is nice. This was how I was introduced once before I got up to speak. Jeff is the ultimate insider and outsider mixed into one person. A consummate speaker, blogger, and thought leader, Jeff has spent 2 decades making educators better at educating. And I really try to do all of this at scale. I've really tried to do a lot of things with regard to creativity, innovation. I've run some alternate reality games that were massive. We unleashed a pandemic, not unlike what we're going through right now, on the world, and had different classes from different continents trying to handle it in different ways. But I've also tried to do some interesting things with regard to technology, with regard to teaching and learning. And then finally, last but not least, if none of this impresses you, which it may not, I'm going to guess that you're a little bored right now. And so maybe you're willing to give me 7 to 10 minutes at a shot as I start going through these chunks and bits of presentations. Maybe. The other thing that I do want to mention, though, is I've got a friend right now who is getting ready to defend his dissertation. And I don't want to steal his thunder, but I asked him for some of his numbers. And after about 700 interviews, he interviewed 325 325 K through 12 teachers, and then the rest were higher ed professors. He's doing a study on professional development and what that looks like inside of education. And the numbers probably won't surprise you that much, but they're possibly a little disappointing depending on how you approach it. In higher ed, you see the vast majority of all professional development being done solely and specifically with subject matter. Most reading is about subject matter. If people go to conferences, they go to conferences about subject matter. They focus on learning more about their subject matter. When it comes to process, things like, you know, how you fill out forms, how you do something that the school requires, that's a very small percentage of their time in terms of professional development over the year. And then the least amount of time is spent on how to actually impact teaching and learning. And learning is probably the more important of those two concepts in that terminology. In K-12, it's a little bit different. Most of their time is spent worrying about process, paperwork and forms and filling things out and dealing with parents and dealing with, you know, classroom management things that really have to be done for the district or the county or whoever it might be. Now, they do spend a little bit more time learning about learning, and they spend a little bit of time learning about subject. But as you can see, neither K through 12 nor higher ed focus much of their time on the art and science of learning. I want to see if I can't share a little bit about that in this series. When it comes to the aspects of learning that I think matter, and I can really break it down into the learning triangle if that's a decent frame, if you know the learning triangle, which is cognition, affection, and conation. When it comes to cognition, there is a lot that we really need to talk about. There's a number of really powerful books, some of which are antithetical to the whole education process, and others are very supportive of how learning is done best. For those of you who are still lecturing, I encourage you to read any of the books that you see listed down here. Make It Stick is a good place to start. Modernizing Learning, How People Learn. That's really not ideal. But when it comes to learning about what I call do first learning or generative learning, when it comes to the importance of group work and how we don't support students in terms of how they figure out how to use groups, when it comes to ed tech, and we use ed tech primarily to measure cognition and not much else, there is a lot that we really need to talk about if we want to talk about how students learn, not how we present information to them, not how it washes over them like a television show, but actually learn. And then when we get to affection and conation, same thing. We know if we want to teach somebody that there's a holistic aspect to a human, that we can't just focus on the brain. We can't just focus on the classroom technique of cognition transfer or understanding or knowledge, or pick a verb from Bloom's if you'd like. We can't just focus on that if we actually want people to learn. Now, if we just want to go in and put in our time and have the students sit there and pretend like they're, you know, paying attention, and then they lock it in their short-term memory, take a test, and then walk away and forget it all, okay, I'm going to talk about how to not do that. And so I'm going to talk about all of the stuff that you've seen so far. It's going to be based in some really good study and research, some excellent works that have come out. This is probably, I don't know, a 10th of the books I would recommend to people, but this is a decent primer. And I'll make these presentations available, by the way. Along the way, I'll recommend people that you might consider following, groups, organizations that might provide some clarity and insight to actually help figure out how to do this. And then at some point, when all of this is said and done, maybe this will pique your interest and you'd like to bring the Institute, bring me or someone, you know, faculty or fellow from our Institute to your institution. We would love to do that. Provide workshops, trainings, but again, I do a lot of speaking at conferences, giving keynotes, those sorts of things. There's a couple of pictures of a week I spent in Rwanda with some outstanding faculty members at Davis College. And then on the right of your screen, you see a keynote that I gave at Online Educa Berlin, which is sort of like a car show of learning technology and ed tech. We talk about a lot, we do a lot. And I would really love to spend just some time with you, 7 to 10 minutes in little chunks that you can sort of absorb and take in and talk about teaching and learning. So I thank you for your time. I hope that you'll check out some more of what we have to present. I'll try to put something new up every week, possibly twice a week if I can, if I've got the ability. But until then, stay safe and enjoy these quarantine notes.